Jeff Gluck covers NASCAR for USA Today. He joins us now. Jeff, what do you see when you watch the video?
I see me wishing that I had more angles, Dan. I mean, it's so hard to tell. First of all, it's like you don't even want to watch the video because it's so disturbing. And so to like view it a couple times, you're like, oh, I don't even know if I can do this anymore. But you know, you watch it and you're trying to figure out, well, what happened? How did he just disappear out of the frame? And I just can't tell from that angle. I can't tell what happened. And I know that the police have already asked people to send in, you know, more footage because, of course, everybody has cell phone cameras these days. So you'd think there'd be more out there, even if it's a rural dirt track. Somebody's filming it. I mean, there was a NASCAR star there. So I can't tell. I don't know what happened, but obviously it was a tragedy either way.
Do you have to understand racing to understand this?
I don't think so. You know, I listen to your show. I love your show. I'm sorry to be joining you under these circumstances, but I've been thinking about how to explain it because I know, you know, like a lot of your listeners probably aren't race fans necessarily, and I think it's kind of like, let's say like, you know, Mike Trout grew up loving Legion ball or something like, and I know Legion ball is only for like teenagers, but let's just say it was open to him for some reason, and he was like, man, I you know, it's so much pressure to be in the big leagues, and I just love playing, like not even in the minors, but like below that, like just total grassroots. And I just want to show up and have a good time. You know, I don't even care if anybody's there or knows I'm coming. I just want to play and like have that feeling where people are unfolding their bleacher chairs on the lawn and selling like $1 hot dogs and just, you know, under the lights again and fresh cut grass. And I just want to go back to that and just as a break. And I think that's what Tony Stewart does. And what happened is, you know, it would be like if there had been a tragic accident somehow in that game, you know, if Trout had thrown a ball or something and it hit some guy in the head and you're like, well, wait, was he aiming for that guy or did it just happen to hit the guy in the head? And you know, it's obviously, you know, it's not something you would ever intend to happen or want to happen. And I think people are just like trying to rack their brains over why he was even there. But it's these guys, they go back for the love of the game, and that's their only outlet for it.
Yeah, I don't have any issue with him doing dirt track racing because he's done that all his life. And it was a year ago where he nearly lost his life on dirt tracks. What question would you ask Tony today?
I mean, did you see him? Did you see him? I mean, that's the kind of question that I want to know. I mean, it's from that video, you can't tell. He just comes in the frame, and you don't know. Obviously, you know, the guy was wearing a dark fire suit. Those tracks aren't well lit, so you're like, maybe he just didn't see him. He's coming around the corner. Those cars, unlike the NASCAR cars, they don't have spotters and radios.
Yeah.
So if it was a NASCAR track, you'd have a spotter saying, hey, there's a guy on the track. He's coming down the track at you. You know, watch out. But you don't know. Yeah, I don't know whether he saw him. And I think that, unfortunately, even when Tony returns to the track and talks, I don't know that he's going to be able to answer that question because now you have all this, you know, possible pending litigation, and he's going to say, listen, I can't comment on that. So I don't know if we're going to get those answers. He might be the only one who ever knows.
You think he'll race this weekend?
I lean toward yes, because I really think he was going to race yesterday until possibly the court of public opinion and, you know, everybody kind of talking some sense into him. As you mentioned earlier in the show, I think people kind of were like, you know, this is really not a good idea. This looks really bad. Because, and it did. I mean, it's funny because in the racing culture, death is kind of part of the sport because obviously it's a really dangerous sport. And so, you know, when racers die, they kind of like go on. They have this thing where they just keep going. I mean, you saw it after Dale Earnhardt's death in 2001. You know, they raced the next week. Dale Jr. is racing the next week. And, you know, it's kind of part of it. So maybe he was thinking along those lines. But to people that aren't in the racing community, it's like, what are you doing? And I think some people in the racing community too thought the same thing, you know, just out of respect for the family. So I think that after this, I think it'll be hard to keep him out of the car unless, you know, maybe a sponsor or something is like, you know, we don't want our name associated with it. Then I think it opens a whole new can of worms. But I think he'll be back probably next weekend at Michigan.
He's Jeff Gluck, USA Today NASCAR writer, joining us Dan Patrick Show. To prove vehicular homicide, though, It's one thing to do it in real life, but to do it on a dirt track, how tough is this? The investigation continues. Maybe wrongful death suit down the road, but are they going to try to prove vehicular homicide?
I don't think so. Listening to the sheriff yesterday, he was saying as of now there's no criminal intent that he sees, and obviously he's still trying to gather information, so it's an open investigation. But I kind of go back to some of the incidents that have happened in hockey. I need to go back and look at this, so I might be speaking out of turn, but I remember the Todd Bertuzzi, Steve Moore situation, and there was all of a sudden this talk like, are hockey fights going to be, under legal scrutiny now? If you hurt somebody in a hockey game or a hockey fight, is that like, are you going to get arrested for it? I think it always seems to come down to something that happens on the field of play has a little bit different than just something that happens out on the street. So I think it would be much more difficult to prove, you would think, if it happened in a sporting event than just regular life.
Tell us something about Kevin Ward, who lost his life.
Well, I think kind of he was unknown, and that's kind of surprising because, the NASCAR, this wasn't NASCAR, this was just racing in general, but the sprint car community is kind of tight-knit, and it is all over the country, and these races are happening, in hundreds of places every Saturday night. But a lot of times these guys are on the radar a little bit, and I think that when Kevin Ward was killed, I think that was kind of the first time a lot of people had heard his name. My colleague Nate Ryan talked to the director of their series, and he was saying that he was a really up-and-coming driver and kind of well-known around that area. But there's so many of these local tracks that it's kind of hard to get on the radar nationally. But obviously, everybody knows his name now.
Jeff, thanks for joining us. We'll continue to monitor this and love to have you back on again.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to join you.
All right. That's Jeff Gluck, covers NASCAR for USA Today.